Al Diaz, and they kind of embraced me as a girl. And I was able to be up there editing and watch them do their work. And all kinds of advice and mentored me. And all of a sudden, I just kind of fell into this. And so I'm totally, it's not really anything to do with me with skill. It's that I've been surrounded by really great people. By you being here, I can tell you, when you listen to what they tell you up here on stage, that's incredible. When you get the chance to speak to them one-on-one, which is what you can do between presentations or after presentations, do it. This is that one-on-one stuff that just blow you away. So, to lead off this morning, this is a woman that I had known about for a long time, and I hadn't had the pleasure of meeting her until actually this morning. But I think she's everything a photographer wants to be, and that is that you want to influence, you want to inspire, you want to educate, you want to open people's eyes. You know, here in this country, I was just speaking to Mandy about it before, we tend to really move on. We're so privileged in the things that we have available to us. Not that there aren't horrific things happening here. You know, as what was pointed out yesterday when we saw the violence in the streets, you know, the gun control violence that Carol did such a great job with. Man, I want to tell you that, and I speak to universities a lot, I speak to schools a lot, and there's no greater education than travel. And my mecca has been the African continent. I mean, I've been here over 50 times working on so many different projects. And what this incredible woman has done has a lot to do with what I see in the continent. Gender equality, girl brides, what she has done to enlighten, to empower girls, to try to bring that gender equality back. Has an incredible project that I think has been well over a decade of work. It's too young to wed. It's these child brides. I've seen that over and over in African countries. It's just amazing, you know, what happens to these girls. And I don't want to take away from what Stephanie's been talking about, but
go on.
How incredibly powerful her work is. It is something that she's been featured everywhere from Time Magazine, New York Times, National Geographic, all the accolades. You can Google the Pulitzer Prize, get all kinds of prizes, you know, photo exhibitions, United Nations. This woman's iconic. She's done incredible work. I just want you to look at it, and some of it's going to wrench your heart. I know it did since I've been following it, and I've seen it in real life. I've seen it in real life. I've seen what's happened to these girls. I cannot say enough about a woman like her who's gone out and connected people to make a change, to make a difference. And that's what's happening. You know, people say, "Oh, it's just overwhelming." You know, it's that old adage of the kid who's on the beach and he's got 1,000 starfishes all stranded on the beach, and he's throwing a starfish at, and the other guy comes up, "What are you going to do? You can't save all these starfish. It doesn't matter what you're doing." You know, the kid takes the one starfish; it doesn't matter to that. So if you can make that change, one person at a time, and Stephanie's doing it much more than that. It's a Canon Explorer, like, you know, again. Google the name. I don't want to sit up here and just go through all these incredible accolades this one has. Understand that she is changing better. So women, who I've always said, stronger, smarter, better sex. I know that because I'm married. And I think it's just open on the door. And again, some of my greatest mentors, the Canvas Bar, Father Good Night, you guys have come to something where you've got this treasure trove of information available to you. You don't just get to speak and talk about it. Up your ears. Without further ado, please welcome Stephanie.
I'm going to stand up here and give you a hug for that. Wow. Well, that was the nicest intro I've ever had anyone give for me, ever. Am I echoing?
Yeah, okay. Because it's a speaker here.
Okay.
All
right. Well, as long as you can hear me all right, thank you so much. That was really amazing and very kind. Thank you for being here on a Sunday morning. I know that's a big ask. We've got my nephew, Austin, out of bed as well, and my brother Eric's here. I'm from Miami, and I have to say I'm really, really honored to be here as considered like one of the Miami Herald photographers, because I was really, I didn't put in the time at the Miami Herald, but my dear colleagues did 30 years plus and all this stuff. I was lucky enough to be asked to, I went to the University of Florida.
Go Gators!
Yeah. and they had, Miami Herald was offering like summer internships you didn't get paid for them, but it was a way to kind of hone your skills and so I did 2 of those, and Dennis Copeland was the director of photography at the time. He let me come back and also go on to, like, I'd come home for spring break because I was a real nerd, and so you know, my brother, and so I would want to do like go do these go work for the Herald on my free time, on spring break and on Christmas break, and I was just really like, I have to tell you, I only taken like one or 2 photo classes when I started, and I remember walking into the Herald and just being like, I do not deserve to be here. This is something that these people are incredible, and I really think that, the Herald photographers were the ones who taught me how to take pictures, and the editors there. It was really like, that was, the photojournalism school, no offense to them, but it wasn't what best experience was. And, I had to learn to do 3 assignments a day, and I was just, and run around, and they let me do crazy stuff that at that time was really, I couldn't believe it. They let me go on a helicopter to photograph, the Super Bowl, and although I will say Peter Bosch said if I get in this grade, he'll push me out of the helicopter. So I was like, okay, okay, when I say so. But it was my formative years as a photographer, and that was a time when we could see each other's work. So I was there for 2 summers. And so the first summer, we were still working in darkrooms, and so we go in the darkroom and see how people were working. We were shooting film, and so they had these screens, and you would push through and see every frame that people were making. And there's really no better experience than that, especially with the talent that these photographers had. And so I would definitely say that, Candace and Jeffrey and Pat Farrell and Al, Mary Balbona, these were people that, really formed how I approached photography and what I thought about things. And I remember one of the big things that the Herald gave me was, I was like really sensitive, and so I would go to some of these things, and I had never been to these like emotional things before. I was a baby, and I would go and find myself like, I'd be crying, I didn't know what to do, and Nuri told me, she said, somebody will learn how to channel that, and I was like, I don't know if I should take pictures, what am I going to do, and I would just get so upset because I couldn't help but connect. And so that connection kind of got in my way. And she was like, you'll figure out, learn how to make that your strength. And that was one of the kind of most important things I learned from being at the Herald. And I hope I did that. So, and I want to thank Canon, and I want to thank Al, and this wonderful shop for letting us be here. It's been wonderful 2 days, and I'm enjoying it as much as everyone else. So jumping into some of the overseas stuff, because of course I was a newspaper photographer, and I worked for the Herald. I did a bunch of different internships in Detroit, Arizona, St. Pete, and then I went to work for Chicago Tribune. And I was sent to cover 9/11. I really wanted to do national and international stuff. And after 9/11 happened, I was sent to cover it. And I realized how much I didn't know about the world. And I realized that I was in the bubble too. And I really wanted to see why would this happen? What would make things, why would we make this, why would that type of attack happen? And so I went to Israel and Palestine, and then I eventually went to Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I ended up, and then of course, it was an incredible learning experience. And of course it was dangerous. People are saying, is it dangerous? Yes, it's dangerous, but it's never as dangerous or scary as the people in the situations. And this is one of those moments. I was really kind of like, and this is an old picture, it's kind of digital, but like, this girl was walking into this fight in Basra, and we were not embedded with U.S. soldiers. We were just, we were unilateral. We were like sleeping in our cars and stuff at the time in southern Iraq. And, but I thought like, wow, if she can do that, I can do this. And then I kept kind of going forward, and I really wanted to focus on women's issues. And this was, I started to think about like how women are impacted by war. And this is a woman who had been, her husband was killed and she ended up going to prostitution because of her and sex work, kind of the hardship she was facing. And I continued to cover conflicts. I didn't see myself as a conflict photographer, though. I saw myself as, like, I was really captured by the people who were just living their lives, and this conflict happened. And they were kind of stuck in it. So I always kind of gravitated to a lot of the things that were more, I don't know, that I felt I was kind of looking for these moments. And so this is in Lebanon. I ended up living in the Middle East. I quit my job at the Strip. And I moved to the Middle East, and I lived in Iraq for 2 years in Beirut for 4. And this is during the war in Lebanon with Hezbollah and Israel. And then I eventually went to Afghanistan, and I'm not going to show all the pictures from, it was a story of women and girls who set themselves on fire. And it was really, really intense. And really, so this is a woman named Roxana, and this is right before she passed away. And she had been married when she was 10. And what I found out when I was looking through all the different, I was interviewing all these girls who survived, because it's a suicide attempt. A lot of them didn't survive. But the ones who did, they had this common denominator. They were very young, and they were married people. And I was like, whoa, what is this? I've never seen anything like this. And so I started to want to look at, what does this look like for girls? What is it? And I looked online, and there's nothing about it. There was some really good reports, but there weren't really great photographs. So I was very lucky to get some grants and support from eventually National Geographic, the New York Times, and German Geo and Stern and different magazines. They got to know me as a war photographer, which I think is kind of busy title. But this is a girl named Najreen. She was 11 when she was married, and she told me, in my whole life, I've never felt love. And I just remember being, wow, like, how can that be? And she was 11, she was married, she was 15 here, and she'd been sold by her dad, and she had been to a drug trafficker, and she escaped. I ended up spending the afternoon jumping rope with her. These are the pictures, but it was, but she was really benefiting from this program. And I thought to myself at that time, I said, it was probably around 2004, and I said, okay, well, I think I'm going to make sure that we can do whatever we can to make sure girls don't feel like this. So I continue to document this issue. This is a pretty tough picture. This is a girl named Jamila. She's 15. This is her husband. He had tried to kill her. She wanted to visit her mother about information. And this is a woman named Malalai Kakar. She was a policewoman for 20 years, and she eventually was killed by the Taliban. But she was so proud of her work, and she knew she was at risk, and she was like, "This is my work." And I said to her, "What's going to happen to this man?" And she goes, "Nothing." And then her team's here, and she goes, "But you can take this picture, and you can show it." And so that's what we did. So this is a photograph that I made, and this week was really interesting for this story, actually. But this is a photograph that I made in 2005. It was an engagement, actually, an 11-year-old who was now in his 40s. And this is what I was really just trying to show people, that this existed. And so I was there, and what happened was, I photographed her, and I was talking to her beforehand, and I said, "How do you feel?" She goes, "Well, how am I supposed to feel?" And I was like, and she was going to be pulled out of school. She wasn't supposed to be married for another 2 years. Turns out, earlier this week, I was at a event in DC at the State Department on Afghan women and girls and how do we support them now, because it's a China out there. And I was at the end, so I went to this event, this summit, and at the very end, I was hanging out with, I was just hanging out. So I went over and I got like some tea, and I was sitting there with this other woman named Regina, and I had never met her before. Turns out she's the relative of this girl. And so we were talking about it, and she's from the same village, which is really crazy. Like, it's this really tiny village in a really remote area of Afghanistan. And she's actually in the process, her sister's a journalist, and they're in the process of connecting us. But what she told me was, the wedding never happened because he was so humiliated that he was out there like this. And of course he denied it and said, I've set up a photo studio and stuff. I was like, yeah, that's me. But it kept us safe. And so, at least for that period. So I continued to go around and I probably covered the issue of child marriage in probably about 16 countries. And then this was 3 girls in Yemen who were married. They were 11, 12, and 13. And I was working on this for National Geographic. But what the main issue is gender disparity. So we have girls are really valued for their bodies, for their labor, for their fertility, and for their sexuality. And so that's what we're kind of trying to upend, is to have people see us valued for other things than that. And so that's what I've been working on in all these countries. This, for the Sunday morning, I'm shielding you from some of the more intense pictures, but this is actually what they call the female circumcision celebration. So I was there with over 200 girls underwent female genital mutilation. And it was, this particular version wasn't, it was in Indonesia, and it wasn't as intense. There's 3 versions of it, and one version is like, it's totally sewn up, and then the third one is to just make a small incision. This is that version. And I think families are really trying to do right by their families. So I've said this the whole time, I don't think families are trying to hurt their girls most of the time. Like, they're trying to hurt them, but they're often trying to protect their other people and survive. So this is also that wedding in Yemen. And this section is kind of about the journey that girls go through. And this is a 5-year-old named Rajni in India. And I was with her. In India, though, they have what's called a bonus. So they have a second marriage when they're older. So her husband was actually quite young. So this happened, it was a secret wedding, and it happened at 4 in the morning. And I was able to be there for that. And this is in Nepal, in a village called Tagati. I'm actually going to this village next Thursday. So I've continued to go back to these communities and stay up. And that girl Rajni from India, I visited her again too. She was probably 13 by the time I met her, and she was still not married, so that's good. But it's still, her story helped me explain to people that this happens at really young ages. This is a girl named Arceli in Guatemala. She was 13 and already had a baby, and I said, what do you look for? What are you hoping for your future? And she said, well, my son will take care of it. And it just shows you, like, and of course, that her husband left her, and so these are the types of things that girls are up against. So after doing this for a while, I started to, getting it published. I was doing stuff, and I was like, man, this is killing me. It was not, I think you saw the emotion in the room yesterday. It's really not easy to do this work, and there's a lot of, like, in a way, moral injury that comes with it, right? You're like in these situations, these girls are getting married, and you have to kind of deal with, should I stop it? Should I call the police? Is it going to cause a fight? Is it going to have a translator killed? Like, these are all the things that you kind of have to manage at the time. And so, but what I did agree with what Pat said yesterday, is what you can't do is get so emotional that you don't do a good job. And so you have, like, the best thing you can do in that moment is do the best that you can. But in this situation, these are 2 girls, Rada and Tahani. Tahani is this one. And I haven't been able to follow up on these girls because the war has been so intense in Yemen. But I actually I was at the hospital nearby, like 2 hours away, not that nearby. And they said, I was talking to the head of the hospital, and he said, they just don't know enough. They just don't know enough. And if you want, I'll go out there and talk to them. And I was like, absolutely. And so what we did is, you can see it's about to rain. He actually took his ambulance. He made this big show of it and took his ambulance out there. And we went. And so while this picture was happening, there's a bunch of men meeting in this building here, talking about what the physical repercussions are of child marriage. Because if girls are married so young, if under 15, they're 5 times more likely to die in childbirth. So we started looking at, if you can't tell them about human rights, they're not quite there yet in some places. We talked to them about, like, their babies, their daughter's babies might die, those types of things. And that tends to work. And then we also had midwives talking to the women. So that's kind of when when I started to be like, and then it worked. Like it really started to have an impact, and people were starting to understand. And I thought, oh, this is where my mental transition started happening. And I was like, okay, well, we can do this. And he said, oh, if we had money, we would do this all the time. And I was like, okay, well, so it's a journey. And then, but what happens is because, if girls are married, the reason I chose child marriage is because if you can raise the age of marriage, and they even have it in the US, which I'll show you in a bit, but if you raise the age of marriage, girls undergo less domestic violence. They have more, they can contribute financially to their communities. We delay FGM, so at least they're an adult if they can decide if they want to undergo it for cultural reasons or not. They just have more respect and more contribution to their society, because ultimately it perpetuates the cycle of violence. Because often what happens, this is a girl, and this guy, she's got all these children, she's like I think she was in her early 20s, and she said to me, he left, and then she was like, show everyone this picture. And because they lose control of their sexuality, their bodies, and so they have birth, they can't control when they're married as children, how many children they have, or how many, or in what succession. So they lose control of their bodies. So now I'm going to bring you to the happy stuff. So there's a little bit intense intro, but this is a girl named Jude, and she was 10 years old. She was married at 6, so that's really bad. This is in Yemen. But when she was married, after a while, she's like, I don't want to do this. And she talked to one of her, she had 2 mothers in the polygamous community, and one of them said, yeah, she's like, I want to get a divorce. And so she helped her get a tax when she was going to divorce and go to the courthouse. And she got a divorce at 10 years old. Like some crazy, amazing 10-year-old. And my daughter's 10, and I'm thinking, man, I could see my daughter Lotus doing something. She was like, she had that fire in her soul, and she's doing well today, by the way. She married later as an adult on her own volition. So then I started to be like, well, what's the solution? Like, how do we fix this? We kind of have spent in this time getting to know this issue. We've been pushing that out there. We know it's a problem, so what do we do? So this is a really great ceremony that I went to in Sierra Leone, where it's an alternative rites of passage where they exchange education with the family. So it's an incentive program. So if you give them education, because it's not free, you have to pay for, it's like secondary school is not free at all, but even elementary school, primary, you have to pay for uniforms, books, all that. Most families just can't do it. So when you get married, which I probably should have said earlier, the family often gets the dowry, and so the dad will get money and cows and things like that in exchange for the girls. And it's probably Afghanistan right now, the current rate is between like anywhere from $500 to $4,000. So if it's complete, if you're hungry and you can't feed your family, that's what they do. So this program was working. And so I started to look at other programs and looking at the strength that, and how to involve the survivors. So this is a story of a girl named Ritu, and she was 17 when she was attacked by somebody who wanted to marry her, and she said no. She was a star volleyball player. But she's now the chairwoman of the Acid Attack Survivors Foundation, and they have a thing called Shiro's, where they a cafe near the Taj Mahal, where they do they exchange, they give them food, and I don't even think they charge actually for donations, and they make awareness about acid attacks. And so from a photography standpoint, I'll just tell you a funny story. So it was one of those, it was during monsoon season, and it was one of those moments where the lights were really bad, it was totally pouring, and they had no light in their room, and I was like, oh my God, I'm never gonna get the pictures I need here, and I'm sitting in their room with them, and she just goes, do you want to go take a bath on the roof? And I was like, yeah. I was like, that sounds incredible. Of course, I was totally unprepared, and I had an umbrella, so my translator was so sweet. We're standing in the rain. She's over me. My camera's soaked. But it makes this really beautiful cathartic moment, because it's tough to be in those situations, and it's tough to you just get angry. But you also, I was at a talk earlier this week at the Northern Shore Course, and Eugene Richards was talking. He goes, it's like you have this anger, from what you see sometimes, but that it can turn into love. And I felt like that, that's kind of the process of what this feels like when you're doing it. This is another successful program in India where they exchange soccer. So they really want to play soccer. So if the boys want to play soccer, they have to bring 10 girls to go to school. And so they had like professional soccer players teaching them. So it was a really successful program, and the girls played as well. This is a program that we kind of started to implement when I formed my organization, TM Thread. And these are kind of safe spaces for girls who are at risk for child marriage or are already married. And so, because once you get married, you're kind of isolated from the community. So it allows you to have time to talk and you have people outside of your family that you can trust. So another thing we do is photo workshops. And we do them, it's survival led, so they're able to kind of like, it's an art therapy program where they learn to express themselves in photography. And so I'm going to show you a little video. Can you hear it? Can you guys hear it? You just need to adjust it so you can hear it? You can hear it okay?
No, yes.
We can hear it. You
Okay.
can go a little louder if you'd like.
Yes,
Not-
please.
Sarah, you can sing along.
Oh, nobody wants me to sing, trust me. But I think I can hear it. Sure, that's great. Oh, there's my girl.
It's a family show.
It goes up with the sorry. Should I unplug it, put it back in? Probably. My little mouse and stuff. Put it back in.
You took a big leap of faith leaving the Chicago Tribune.
Yeah, but I could find it. It was tough. But we were putting my pictures on page, like, I was doing all this work, really bigger stuff, and it was going on like page 18, and I was just like, no.
Exactly. After you left the trip, how were you able to finance your life?
Well, I was lucky because it was a time that you could do that. It was a good time to freelance industry. It's tougher now, but you can still do it. Some videos, I hope this works. Are you want to help me?
I'll answer questions though. I mean, yeah, I was.
Every 2 seconds, a girl is married.
Estava sendo regressive. Size haberden bahsedebilirim esasında. Size filosofia kişiye kimlikatıyor, kişiye ki kıvapları seslendirmesi. Ikiwa
Child marriage has many significant harmful repercussions. The most important being it perpetuates the cycle of poverty. Girls are taken out of school, and if they're forced to give birth at very young ages, often their lives are in jeopardy.
we've rescued about 2,000 girls, but we sponsored 315 to schools. Angola se fabigua assim, alguém conhece. Só não conhece assim, não assim que passa, assim que passa, que passa, que vai tudo para você, que tudo assim, isso é tudo.
This is the second year we're running the Tahani Photo Workshop in conjunction with the Samburu Girls Foundation here in Rwanda, Kenya. All of the girls attending this workshop are either former child brides or have escaped early marriages.
This workshop is about photography, but only as a tool. It's really about your voice and how important it is that the world hears what you have to say.
The workshop is built to work on several levels. It's meant to strengthen community bonds. It's meant to build leadership skills. It's meant to be able to help girls process the unspeakable trauma that they've endured.
It's an incredible opportunity for the girls to channel their complex emotions into their photography, using it as a tool of self-expression and therapy.
The photography is a different angle and it's unique because it brings the world out to the bigger world. Some of them then go back to the village and try to use that information to rescue their own sisters and neighbors.
Before this workshop, I was afraid to talk in front of people and to share my story, but now I have that courage to lead people.
I think there's a big difference between the girls who went through the photography program and the other girls. They look different, they sound different, there's more confidence.
We have a community exhibition at the end, which is an opportunity for the girls themselves to advocate to protect girls' rights.
There's still that lack of understanding of the community of exactly what they should do at this point, because while they have had it wrong, but to them it's been a culture for so many years.
Let us support this guy because they are told that God can do anything. I only ask that God can do anything.
This workshop is in honor of all the girls who have made in marriages around the world and cannot escape.
My name is Immaculate. My name is Master.
My name is Mary, Susan, Selena, Angela, Monica.
My name is Eunice.
My name is Mimi,
Mercy. Silvana.
Rosina.
My name is Evan.
Tashan.
Modesta. My name is Anita.
My name is Jen.
thank you. So the good news is about that situation is we stayed with all those girls. So most of them, we just actually handed support. So they stayed in school. We gave them all scholarships. They stayed in school, and then with our support and our donor support. So not my support, but with our donor support. And they gave, and one of them wasn't doing so well in school, and I was like, you gotta do better, because how are you gonna do a proposal for me? If you wanna like do something in your community or something, how are you supposed to do it? So I came back the next day and done this whole proposal. And it was like 2 pages long, and it was about how they wanted to be, have cameras and go to their communities and do photography. And they made their own group called the Young Lionesses Club. So that's what they ended up doing, and okay. See everything on my computer. You don't like emails?
Amazon shop.
I always have translators. I mean, I really tried to learn Arabic, but I was traveling way too much at that time. YouTube. I was always traveling so much, so even though I took Arabic classes, I just wasn't very good at it, and I couldn't stay in one place long enough. But my translators are the ones who made this work happen, right? Like, I don't just go into those places and they're like, oh, hey, let this foreigner come and do all this stuff. I mean, I had to talk to them about the work I wanted to do, why it was important, what they thought about it, and they were always the ones who made it happen. And it was often like, a lot of times, people they knew, and I've stayed in touch with many of them over the years as well. So one of the issues that was important to me was looking at how girls are often married it's sexual violence happens in conflicts, right? And they're not always married. Sometimes it's just sexual violence, but sometimes they're married. And in the situation with Boko Haram, which is where the Chibok girls were taken, they had like 256 girls that were taken. I went back and did a story about how actually there were like thousands of girls that were also taken, but it just wasn't in the news because it wasn't all from one school at one time. So I went back and I did this story, and this was in collaboration with Ford Foundation, UNFPA, and then we published it in the New York Times Sunday Review as an opinion piece, actually. And then that's when I started getting into writing, even though I don't hate writing, but I had to, I have the information and the research, and really most of my work is journalism, right? It's journalism gets you into those places. And so I went to all the different refugee camps, and just really, most of them were in the host community though. So I spent time just in these areas, and I kept hearing all their stories. And they were really powerful and beautiful, and they were so strong, even though they had been through so much. These are 2 twin sisters. One of them who was having significant problems with fistulas as a result, which is kind of an issue that can happen, causing lack of bladder control, and it just was really tough. And this actually picture we might put, I'm trying to get the U.S. mission to the United Nations to put it in their window next week. So we're working on that. And this is a 14-year-old named Dada. And obviously we had parental permission for all of these projects. And sometimes the husband's permission. But she just wanted to be able to make a living. So I was talking to I started working with some NGOs, and I was talking to them about, what do we do? How do we get people to care? And they're like, well, maybe you can bring the girls here. And I was like, oh, okay. And so we did. So we brought Yakaka and Hawa to New York. And they were the ones in like the first 2 pictures. And it was pretty crazy. But they had a blast, and they met with all the women of the Senate. And many members of the House as well. And so then, so as you can see, I started working with different organizations to try to get my pictures in different places. And so we started doing exhibitions, bringing girls here. And this is kind of the advocacy side that we started to do. This is in the Senate Rotunda. And then we had an exhibition at the United Nations. This is with Archbishop Tutu, the late, great Archbishop Tutu, who was a real proponent of ending child marriage. And we also had a Times Square billboard. And this stuff was done during the first Day of the Girl in 2012. And that was up for, I think this was up for a few weeks, but the exhibition at the UN was up for 3 months. So that was pretty amazing. So we're looking actually to try to do a new exhibition at the United Nations this year as well, but on gender apartheid. So I just put this up here. So through my work and through the where I photograph this or shown the work or we have programs, this is kind of what our work looks like globally. We still have a ways to go, but we're working on it. All right, so this is where we bring to Afghanistan today. When the U.S. withdrew from Afghanistan in 2021, the whole project, as you know, started in Afghanistan. So I felt like compelled to get the translators out that I worked with at that time. But when you work in conflicts as a photographer, you have like a strange skill set. So, and you're kind of used to being in contact with all kinds of different people. And so a bunch of us started evacuating people. And we eventually were able to evacuate over 1,000 people. What the most amazing, and so the U.S., when they were evacuating people, they were evacuating mostly male primaries, like male translators who worked with U.S. troops. But all these women human rights groups, they weren't evacuated at all. Like they were being left behind. And so our goal was to start getting out those women who were really high risk prosecutors. Like the woman I met that was the sister of, or the relative of that girl, she was the first female prosecutor, and some of them were prosecuting the Taliban, some of them were they were prominent journalists, so we evacuated a lot of prominent journalists, we evacuated people who were high up in the government, people that the Taliban would come back and want to make their lives hell, or imprison them or kill them. And so, but I was also introduced to this incredible network of incredibly talented and well-trained people, because the U.S. had been there for so long and they were really involved in building their society. So I ended up hiring a bunch of them. And so of course we knew that child marriage would go through the roof, right? Because you pull girls out of school, now if you have all these girls out of school, what's going to happen? Like school is a protective factor. So we started seeing child marriage go through the roof. And it increased like 500% by one estimate that I heard. And then there was a girl named Parwana who was in CNN, and she was married to this man. And they asked, her story went viral, and they asked us if we could help, and we could. And so we were able to get involved.
An Iranian love song plays from a cassette as a driver navigates his way through the snow-dusted Lehman Valley in northwestern Afghanistan. Round in the back of his station wagon is a mother and her 6 children, who've just left behind a life of constant struggle and hardship, all they've ever known. Among them, 9-year-old Parwana. Our cameraman Siddiqui asks her how she's feeling. "I'm so happy," she says, with a beaming smile. CNN met Parwana, dressed in pink, in an internally displaced camp in Baghdad's province. Her father claims he was selling her to feed the rest of the family. He already sold his 12-year-old into marriage and told CNN that unless his situation improved, he would have to sell his 4 remaining daughters as well, including the youngest, just 2. Parwana's buyer, who lived in a nearby village, confirmed he was taking the 9-year-old as his second wife. CNN was granted rare access to film the final payment and handover. He paid a total of 200,000 Afghans, just over $2,000 US for Parwana, in land, sheep, and cash. "This is your bride. Please take care of her," says Parwana's father. Of course I will take care of her, replies the man. As he drags her away, she whimpers. Moments later, she digs her heels into the dirt, refusing to go, but it's hopeless. CNN's story caused an outcry. US-based charity Too Young to Wed took the lead. Its founding executive director, Stephanie Sinclair, has been working to end child marriage and help vulnerable girls around the world for almost 20 years. She says the perfect storm is brewing in Afghanistan, and it's the girls that are suffering.
I know these stories are difficult to watch and they're difficult to do, and they bring around a lot of concern, but at the same time, we need to keep people understanding that this is happening. We need to keep ringing the alarm bell, understand these are real girls and real lives, and they can be changed.
As a result of intervention from the charity, Pawana was allowed to return home after almost 2 weeks with the wife's family. Too Young to Wed then organised to have Pawana, her mother and siblings removed from the camp with the father's permission. Their 4-hour journey to neighbouring Herat province was broken up with some childhood fun. Before arriving at the motel, a few days later they moved into the same house. Pawana's mother, 27-year-old Reza Gul, has never lived in a house. She was sold into marriage at 13 and has since had 7 children, 6 of whom were girls. Most days in the camp she would beg for food, and often her family would go to sleep hungry. Now all she wants is to give her children a better life. I have a dream, a wish they go to school and start an education, she says. I have a lot of wishes for them. They rescued me. They've given me a new life, says Pawana. I thank the charity for helping me. Too Young to Wed has already begun distributing aid to Pawana's impoverished camp, among others.
These are communities that have relied on international aid for the last 20 years. And so with a lot of that aid stopping, these people didn't stop needing support. And we can't let them pay the price because ultimately girls always pay the biggest price.
I speak to Pawana on Zoom through my colleague Lucia.
Hello, Pawana and Anna.
How are you? How are you feeling?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm so happy. I'm safe. I rescued.
Then she asks, when are you sending me to school? She wants to study and become a doctor or a teacher. But fairy tale endings are few and far between for girls in Afghanistan, even more so now than ever. Anna Corrin, CNN.
So I'm sure you're going to ask, how did we do that? Well, our team's really, really amazing. And we have about 15, 20 team members inside Afghanistan. And we have supporting about 200 teachers. And we have about 3,000 girls in school right now. And a lot of times we're now working with World Food Program, UN agencies, things like that. So kind of we all provide something different. And we work with local faith-based leaders like mullahs and different things like that, elders, to talk to them about this and let them know kind of the harmful repercussions. And they usually help. Even the Taliban has helped at times. But they've also married some of these girls themselves, so we're not fans of theirs. But it's been a journey for sure. I want to be cognizant of time. How long is this video? It's long. We just have a small video on just some of the work there. These are not my pictures, but it shows some of the other work we did in the last year. And so now I'm not in Afghanistan. I'm not going to Afghanistan because I've spoken out too much, I guess, at this point. So in different media, but I am working with other photographers. So this is a really amazing photographer named Rian Zaha, and I ended up writing the story for the Washington Post. It was published this past January, and we did this big piece on this issue. And then I'm going to go to Nepal and then Pakistan after this next week. But so we continue to do the work. Okay, so then, I did do some work in the US on child marriage, and I plan to do some more, but I haven't focused on it because the rates are so much lower here. And so I felt like, well, I wanted to, where we could make the biggest difference, where we needed to do the most work. But in 2008, the Fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints really they were global news because they had put all these girls, they were all these girls getting married, forced marriage, and it was true. Their allegations were true. So I ended up they were all on this ranch, which doesn't exist today anymore, Yearning for Zion Ranch, and I ended up spending about 2 years with them, but I'm not going to share. It ended up being a National Geographic cover story, and I'm just going to walk you through a couple of the pictures of some of the child bride pictures. But this is a girl named Vita Keats, and she was 19, but this was her daughter, and she was married to their so-called prophet Warren Jeffs. And then this was in one of Warren's homes. So we spent some time looking at the families, and you could see all these young brides. Both of these girls were married already as minors. And these girls, this one, and that one were all some of the teen brides, and this was published in the New York Times magazine. This is Teresa Jeffs, and Teresa, she was married as well, and her husband ended up going to jail. So a lot of these guys went to jail, which was great. And Warren Jeffs was in jail too. And this is the agencies doing DNA swabs on some of the kids to see who the dads were. But it was a really interesting story, and it was definitely like being in a completely different, other country. Just happened to be, 2-hour flight away. So I started on the Child Marriage Project, but it was so interesting. I pitched it to National Geographic as like just this homegrown community. It started in the US and it's here, and it was just really interesting. So this is a guy named Joe Jessup. These are 4 of his wives and half of his children. So and this ended up being a cover for Nat Geo, like this part. And then I spent some time with them. This was like, they this crazy zip line that went down from the mountain. It was terrifying. Of course, they made me do it, and I was like, ugh. So I was just as soaked as they were. But yeah, it was a really, and I was still really, I kind of had a reminder, they had someone always with me to make sure I didn't do anything I wasn't supposed to do or could see something I shouldn't see, because it was a very secluded group. And I'm still really good friends with him. He ended up leaving the FLDS after Warren, once he heard the tapes that Warren had with these girls. But this was what it's like to be in the community as an outsider. Like, I was at this funeral, and I was sitting there, and they were just all looking at me like, what is she doing in here? Because they had never allowed an outsider in before. So it was quite interesting, but eventually I kind of like wore them down. I just hung out. I mean, just never not around. And I had no life. I mean, my brother can attest to it. Like, I just hung out, and I was just learning as much as I could about the communities. I talked to their attorneys, and I waited for ways to, like, what was the story they would want me to tell too? So what were they afraid of, right? You have to think about, what are people concerned about? And there's a big conversation about collaborative journalism or not collaborative journalism, like outsider journalism, and what that looks like. That's a very valid conversation that should be happening. But it's so interesting. I think they're both valid personally, and I think it's just like, because I think sometimes if you're so used to it, you don't find it interesting enough to photograph it. You know what I mean? Like, and so it was, it just warmed down, and I really educated myself about the community. I knew a lot about them, and I knew a lot about why they were doing this, what this meant to them culturally, and they wanted their story told, but then they also, and I thought it was a legitimate story to tell, even if I didn't agree with some of their practices. Because if you don't know, and people don't know things that they don't agree with, then it still happens. So there's no way to help and address the situation if people didn't know what was going on. So this is a guy named Merrill Jessup, and he went to jail. All these guys went to jail, so that was good. And then this was Bonita Jessup, his only legal wife. And then these are all his other wives. So, and this is obviously about gender disparity too, right? Like, you don't have, and they really, the men in this community told these women who they were going to marry, if they're going to break the marriages apart. Joe Jessup actually was eventually excluded from his community for whatever reason. They were very controlling, and so yeah. But but I liked finding these other moments too, where there was some joy in it, and there was some, they did believe it in these things, and it's fair to share it. So on a totally different topic, this is, I did a story also for Nat Geo on Kumaris, which are living goddesses in Nepal. And I just showed a couple pictures of this because it was really interesting. They're just normal girls who go through this process of being selected to be a living goddess. But one of the things is they do pull them out of school. Some of them go to school, some of them don't. But it becomes this kind of like very, even though they're seen as goddesses, they still, like, they're not even allowed, and some of them, because there's 10 of them in the Kathmandu area, Kathmandu Valley, like, we don't even let them touch the ground. That's why they're carrying them. And so it's interesting. And this is kind of what it looks like to be there and photograph it in this form. And it also ended up being an Nat cover. I don't love that picture, but that's someone they chose. And then this brings me to my more recent work. This is, I did a piece for the New York Times Magazine in 2022 on the Dobbs decision, which canceled Roe versus Wade. And this was high-risk pregnancy at the Cleveland Clinic, and what this looked like for women who were, weren't really sure if they could have if they wanted to have their, because a lot of these women's lives were at risk, or their babies' lives were at risk, and so they were in these situations. So, for instance, Megan here, she had strokes after her first birth, and ended up with a very, very development is a child. That child will need care her whole life. But she got pregnant again and wanted to give birth anyway. And so that was her choice. And then this is during the birth. I went to a lot of births during this project. And I was inspired by the looser takes and how, when we were looking at pictures yesterday, kind of seeing more than one photograph of a situation. So I included a few, not selects, but just to kind of see it. These are like some of the things that can happen as a knot in the umbilical cord, which can be really dangerous. And another high risk pregnancy. And one of the things that can happen is they have these, so for instance, one of the women, listen here, sorry, I'm not going to do that to you, but they would have like twins, and one twin would be not viable. So if they didn't, or would be only somewhat viable and have a really difficult birth or life. So if they didn't take out that twin, it could affect the other twin or the life of the mother. But now that's not possible in Ohio. So those are the types of things. And actually we found out that there have been, I was just reading like more than 65,000 births from rape since the decision. So there's lots of this type of stuff going on, and it's an important issue. And they ended up nominating this for the Pulitzer. I think it was honored to be nominated. And this is the end of my thing, and then a higher note, because it's a little bit of a heavy presentation. But one of my friends, Jacqueline Martin, did a story on albinism in Tanzania, and they were really cute pictures. And then I had an opportunity to cover anything I wanted for this medical journal. And so I was like, I want to go take a look at this. And so I went to Tanzania as well. And her story really, I'll use in a second, but albinism is a rare genetic condition. About 1 in 20,000 people get it. And, but these people were there because they were starting to attack people with albinism to use their bones in potions and voodoo kind of thing, witchcraft. But it's basically, they're just like everybody else. They just have no pigment, except for they have low vision, and which means they're legally blind. That's why they're leaning so closely, because they're trying to read. And their spots on their face is sun damage. So they have the highest rates of skin cancer in the world. But these are 2 kids who lost their limbs because they were attacked because for this superstition. And then I went to India, and so I did this global project on albinism for Nat Geo, and it was really beautiful. And I got to photograph this family that had one of the highest, immediate families with albinism. But the issue is that actually they had people didn't want to marry them, so that was really sad. And that's why they were intermarrying, and that's why the albinism was continuing. But times are changing, and that's really interesting. So I met this model named Deandra Forrest, and she was doing some great stuff in New York. So we covered her as well, and it ended up being one of the covers around the world as well. And so my husband and I were actually in the adoption process at the time, and so I was like, can we adopt kids with albinism? Because a lot of the kids that were available with for adoption had special needs. And I saw that during the course of this project, I saw that in China, and I didn't include that picture, but in China, they had a lot of kids for adoption because of their albinism, because it was a one-child policy, and they only had, if they didn't want to have, if they could only have one child, they didn't want to have a disability or do something, because a lot of them were present families and things like that. And so, and he was like, I think we can provide good lives for kids. We can give them what they need. And so we ended up adopting now my daughter Lotus and Forrest. I just included this funny picture. That was like during our trip to China to get them. And this is when I met Miss Lotus. She's a firecracker. And she's still as much of a firecracker as she was the day we met her. This is when we met her. They were 7 and 3. One of the best moments of my life, obviously. And then so we ended up doing a campaign on albinism called Colorful. It was talking about, they still have color, it's just a different color. It's like a different thing. And so we did this with the NGO, and this is Deandra again. And I'm not a studio photographer. I was Jeffrey's assistant a bunch of times, so I did something. but that was I was dogging away, calling him, what do I do? I got to shoot. But this is my daughter, looking just angelic. and this is my son, and this other guy, another model who's amazing, sweet guy. And this is another beautiful picture of Deandra. And she was so sweet. She went for like 10 hours for the shoot, so doing her hair. There's a guy named Justin who's amazing on TikTok and Instagram. By the way, he's still modeling. And so they had this incredible, and we did it for this Times Square billboard. And it was amazing that we were able. It was kind of strange shapes, but we were able to kind of make it happen. And it was the first time this community had had an opportunity like this. So it was just a nice thing to give to them. So that's it. So I wanted to end on something Happy to answer you.
So how much of your book focuses on covering the legislative side of things, and that's foreign policy that contributes to some situations that
Yeah.
this stuff?
It depends, so I work with policymakers. I've done a lot of work with Senator Gillibrand's office, and Senator Shaheen's office. I do some of it. I'm not, it's like, that's an area that we hope to grow. We partner with people who it's really their expertise though. But in some cases, we end up having to do it ourselves. We ended up writing a resolution at one point, a law firm that does pro bono work for us, things like that. So it is an area of growth for us, for sure. And I didn't mention that a lot of, so it's a community effort. We're all kind of spokes in the wheel. And they ended up, from the child marriage work, they ended up, after that exhibition, and a lot of advocacy by a lot of people, I mean, it was at the United Nations in Geneva and New York, and traveled to 15 countries. They named child marriage as one of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's Target 5.3. So that was something, it's not going to be cheap, but it's good that it's on the list as in the harmful practices we can address. So that's kind of cool. It's a team effort. All of this is a team effort.
I'm gonna try not to burst into tears, but this is what other people do. And you have dedicated, I don't know anybody who has dedicated themselves as you have and achieved what you have. It's extraordinary, it's astonishing. I don't know anybody who's done such a broad kind of breadth of to help other people in other situations, but especially young women. And it's rare to see something like this, that somebody is so devoted to it. And thank you for all of the little girls and the young women who you have saved. I mean, we all hope that our pictures will change things for the better, but you're phenomenal. You're one in a million, billion who has achieved this. And thank you for being so dedicated to everything.
Well, I think that a lot of our pictures do stuff we have no idea. And so I wouldn't, but my work, thank you so much for that, Maggie. But like, I think that our work does more. I heard that a lot during Carol's talk and past talk, I'm not sure if it does stuff. I think it does. I think it's just a matter, it's just as a photographer, we're so removed from the process. But I do think it does. And I think, and it's such an incredible profession. I really hope that, I know that we'll find a way to continue doing it. I also want to thank my family, my brother, and my nephew is here. I've left so many holidays and not been there for holidays and not been there for things. And, and I haven't been a great family. And I'm working on changing that in this chapter of my life. But, they've been very tolerant of my career. And so it's not without sacrifice. And as I know, every photographer who does any of this type of work is in the same boat. And we don't do this without our fans. Well, thank you everyone for the inspiration. Thank you for including me in this Miami Herald event. I feel like I'm a little bit of an imposter, but but I will say two things. I find that when I was listening to Pat talk, I was like, well, I'm definitely a Miami girl because I talk like a truck driver like he does. So I was like, I'm behaving now that I'm doing more advocacy stuff. And I was like, okay. And another funny story is I was like, forgot how much of a, like, I've been away from Miami for a while, so I was like, I'm gonna have some Cuban coffee. And I had like a bunch of too much Cuban coffee like yesterday, and like all night I was awake. I was like, my heart was beating fast. I was just like, what the hell did I do to myself? So I think I appreciate the welcome back, and I appreciate this. Miami's my home. You know, I went on my first ever assignment with anyone with Al. It's just, I'm grateful. This is probably my favorite talk ever. So thank you for being here and welcome me. All right. All good?
Thank you. Yes,
Thank you. ¿Qué digo el otro fotógrafo? ¿Qué va atrás?